Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I am Shorbujit Pal, the program manager of the Climate Club's Global Matchmaking Platform, hosted at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. It is my great pleasure to be welcoming you to the Global Matchmaking Platform's new webinar series, Insights into Unlocking a New Industrial Age. This new series is dedicated to unpacking the evolving landscape of industrial decarbonization and green industrial transformation. As countries and industries worldwide rethink how they produce, power, and grow, balancing the imperatives of competitiveness and climate, this series explores what shapes the next generation of industrial growth. From technology to policy to systematic shifts, each webinar will distill complexity and hopefully cut through much of the jargon in very layman
You're on
term
mute on my
to
side.
offer
In case
clear,
you've been speaking on
evidence-based
mute, Saro,
insights
on my
that
side at
support
least.
decision makers, practitioners,
as
and
well as on my
stakeholders.
side.
We hope through the webinar series, we'll be able to engage with a large number of different kinds of stakeholders, whether from the governments, whether from the private sector, whether from industry, to inform and shape the conversations going forward. We at the Global Matchmaking Platform are focused on elevating the conversation to the global level,
I cannot hear
offer
you still.
matchmaking services to support countries on their decarbonization pathways, and provide this as a platform, just like this webinar and discussion, to exchange with the right number of stakeholders across the board, whether it's in the public sector, private sector, whosoever is engaged with this conversation on industry transformation. Today's webinar and why we are here is focused on a very important topic, given the fact that the industrial transformation has significant impact on the nature of the climate discourse, which, however, historically has seen very little references to industrial transformation, although some of us who are practitioners are well aware that industry is responsible for over a third of the overall emissions. It is therefore very imperative. It is therefore very important that we have this discussion to take stock with regards to what transpired at the most recently concluded climate conference, the COP30, which took place in Belém, which has been touted as a COP for action, coming midway between the global stocktake. And for all of us who have been kind of part of these exercises, also was the moment when countries submitted their nationally determined contributions, also referred to as NDC 3.0. In the 3 weeks since we have had the climate conference in Belém in Brazil, today is a good moment to take stock of what transpired. We will be hearing today from colleagues who have been closely involved with the process, whether it's from the United Nations Secretary General's Climate Action Team or the UNFCCC, and colleagues who work with me directly, whether it's at UNDP or UNIDO, who have been part of this conversation. So needless to say, I think it would be good to take also stock with regards to who's in the room. Could we maybe have a short poll to understand who's there participating as part of today's discussion? So if it's possible, could we quickly have up this short poll to understand who's joining and from where? Yes. So I think given the fact that we would need to start working on the NDCs, given the fact that we have now seen a large number of commitments which have been made in Brazil during the climate conference. This is a transition, a transformation which will require an all of economy and all of sector approach to really make this change happen. So the fact that we have a participation today from the different parts of the economy, whether public sector, civil society, and other stakeholders, I think it would be good to kind of understand what stakeholder community is participating and who is there in the room. So if I may ask you, those of you participating, to indicate which sector you represent. I think it will be in the interest of all of us, not just as panelists, but also as other participants to understand the stakeholders who are involved in as part of this discussion. And then noting the fact that, this is a truly global transformation, we also would like to understand where you're joining us from, which parts of the world. So I think if we have had enough responses on the first poll, we can gradually move to the second poll, if that's possible. That's right. So if you could indicate as participants which parts of the world you are joining us from, that would be really nice. We have been through the Global Matchmaking Platform, and many of the partners who are joined with us today, been supporting countries, whether it's from the Far East, in countries such as Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia, where we have been having different discussions to identify what their priorities are, or on the far west, whether it's Colombia, or Ecuador or Peru, with whom we have been having discussions to understand what their needs for industry decarbonization are. Thank you, colleagues. Could we have a quick view of also the results for everybody to have a sense? Okay, so we have people joining from different parts of the world. Largely noting the European presence, a lot of people also joining from Europe. But I think, there are, a fairly large number of participants joining us also from Africa and from Asia Pacific. Thank you very much for responding to this poll. So if we just kind of move on to the agenda, therefore, for today, we have an illustrious group of speakers who have been involved with this overall conversation around industrial transformation. We have our colleagues from the United Nations Secretary General's Climate Action Team, Emma, who is joining us. We will also have from the UNFCCC, Dio, who's joining us, who's responsible for all discussions related to mitigation, and industrial actions is a key, activity within the mitigation space. We have our colleague from UNDP joining us, Lulu. She's been in charge of the work which is happening within UNDP in the space of industrial decarbonization, but more broadly on the climate promise. So we'll come to them gradually. My own colleague, Nurzat, who's working within UNIDO, and last but not the least, Hugo, who I'll turn to during the panel discussion to share views from UNIDO with regards to the overall dimension on the experience from COP30 itself. But before we start the panel discussion, I would like to turn now to my colleague Andreea Miu to take us through a bit of the framing with regards to some of the key priorities on industry decarbonization, how they have transpired within the NDCs, and what were some of the key highlights we saw for some of us who didn't join personally and physically at COP30. What were the key highlights which were announced at COP30? So, Andreea, over to you.
Thank you very much for this, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here. Today, I'd like to briefly set the scene for our discussion by looking at how industry has emerged as a central pillar of climate ambition in the 2025 NDC cycle, and how this momentum carried through to the outcomes of COP30. What we are seeing now is a real shift in how countries position industrial decarbonization, not just as a side issue, but as a core driver of climate, economic, and development strategies. My goal in the next few minutes is to outline why this shift matters and how it is showing up in both national commitments as well as the global processes such as COP. Next slide, please. So, just to get some of the basics out of the way, industry is responsible for more than a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet for a long time it was not strongly reflected in national climate plans such as NDCs. Most early pledges focused on energy systems, buildings, or transport, leaving the harder to abate sectors on the sidelines. But industrial decarbonization is not just an emissions challenge. It is also a question of economic transformation, job creation, resilience, international competitiveness, and the ability to integrate into a global economy that is rapidly changing. In other words, getting industry right is not optional. It's essential for achieving climate goals while securing long-term economic opportunities. Next slide, please. This brings us to the 2025 NDC cycle, sometimes called the NDC 3.0, which represents a real turning point. For the first time, industry featured prominently across the vast majority of updated NDCs. An analysis done on submissions until the end of October 2025 by our colleagues from UNDP and UNIDO, and with support from us at the Global Matchmaking Platform, shows that over 90% of submissions mentions industry as a mitigation priority. And this is actually a major departure from previous cycles where only 40 to 50% included any industry reference at all. So countries are now starting to integrate industrial decarbonization more systematically, whether through energy efficiency, technology pathways, cleaner production, or hard to abate sector strategies. And this reflects basically growing political recognition that industrial transformation must underpin national climate strategies. The analysis that our colleagues have done is very rich, and I invite you to have a look at it, and I will paste it somewhere in the Q&A, or perhaps, if that's not possible, circulate it after the webinar with the post-webinar materials. Next slide, please. So to illustrate the shift that I was talking about and make it a bit more concrete, it's useful to look at a few country examples. So the report I just mentioned by UNDP and UNIDO shows how countries are beginning to translate industrial ambitions into specific plans and tools, and highlights a few case studies, out of which I just chose a few to illustrate here, but you can have a look at the report. There will be many more there. So let's start with Kenya, who is strengthening industrial components of its NDC by prioritizing energy efficiency and cleaner productions across sectors. With support through the Net Zero Partnership, Kenya's next actions will focus on developing sectoral decarbonization roadmaps, MRV systems, and low carbon pathways for cement. Another example is Indonesia, who is advancing a Net Zero 2050 roadmap for 9 industrial subsectors and building its national industrial emissions reporting system platform. The next steps for Indonesia include establishing emissions methodologies that will support an industrial emissions trading system and a modular GHG reporting platform. Another example is Uzbekistan, who's focusing on energy efficiency and low carbon technologies across high emitting industries such as cement, ceramics, and chemicals. With UNDP support, the country is also developing a greenhouse gas baseline, policy gaps analysis, and a cement sector roadmap to prepare for investment-ready projects. Another example, really quickly, is Brazil, who was the host of COP30, as we all know, who is embedding industrial decarbonization in its updated NDCs with new technologies for heavy industry and the creation of a net zero industrial decarbonization hubs to drive the innovation and finance part. So these are all examples from the UNDP UNIDO analysis that I've mentioned before, and you can read more about them as well as other case studies in the report. But what these examples, why I'm highlighting these, is that this shows that countries are not just naming industries in their NDCs anymore, they're actively planning how to decarbonize and taking concrete actions. Next slide, please. But since the analysis that I mentioned was completed in October, the number of NDC submissions has actually grown significantly. We now have roughly 122 submissions, with more still expected to come over the next few months. And in this new wave of submissions since October, we are seeing additional commitments from countries for the industrial components of their national plans. And just to name a few examples that we have researched here at the GMP, we have, for example, Peru, who has introduced a 5-step plan to transform manufacturing and domestic trade, including cleaner fuels, cement mitigation, and public-private procurement and financial incentives. Another example could be Turkey, who will be the host of COP31, who is placing industrial decarbonization at the core of its NDCs and has introduced new industrial emissions legislation to strengthen cleaner production, monitoring, and competitiveness, with particular support for SMEs. Another example could be South Africa, who is framing decarbonization with the broader green industrialization strategy, one that links climate goals with jobs, social inclusions, and long-term competitiveness. So these updates just reinforce the point that industrial transformation is becoming mainstream and a global feature of climate pledges. Next slide, please. So, of course, the COP processes extend far beyond NDCs. At COP30 in Belém, we saw that industrial decarbonization rise to the top of the global agenda. We had the Belém Declaration on Global Green Industrialization, which was a major milestone of ambition raising, signaling that industrial transformation must be systematic and integrate with development priorities such as equity, inclusions, and economic growth. We also saw the outcomes of the working group on green industry support for emerging and developing economies that was being launched, which was the political statement and the roadmap for scaling up support. This working group was set up after COP29, and its goals was to help unlock investment and accelerate industrial decarbonization at scale. And you can read more about these in the links, which will be shared after the webinar. But what I wanted to highlight here is, and why I included this, is because these initiatives show that the international community is now recognizing the need for coordinating long-term support for industrial transitions, especially in emerging markets and developing economies. And next slide, please. And finally, COP30 was not just about ambition, it was also about implementation. Under the Global Climate Action Agenda, industry was elevated as a strategic priority with commitments to advance low emissions manufacturing, strengthen standards and MRV systems, expand technology transfer, and build industrial decarbonization hubs. And the message from Belém was very clear, and it was that industrial decarbonization is central to delivering the Paris Agreement and is no longer an add-on, and it can no longer be postponed. So what this means for countries, it's a signal of a structural shift in how national plannings must be evolved. And for industry, it provides increasing clarity about the direction of travel, one that will shape competitiveness as well as investment and supply chains. And the next one will be my final slide, please. And yes, what I tried to frame today is the fact that the 2025 NDC cycle, as well as COP30, marked a clear shift in the direction of travel, and the fact that industry has moved from the margins to the center of climate action. And for all of us, this direction of travel also underscores why this webinar is important and why it matters. And the fact that the question is no longer whether industry should be part of climate action, but how we operationalize it at scale. And that's exactly what today's conversation is designed to explore. And now I'll pass it back to our moderator, Sabojit, for the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Andrea, thanks for sharing, the background framing. I think, this is extremely helpful for everybody to come to the same page with regards to where things stand with regards to this important topic of industry transformation. Next slide, please. I wanted to start this conversation first with my colleague from the UN Climate Action Team, Emma. I mean, you have been part of this discussion and have really seen how the discussion on industry transition and green industrialization have taken, or come into the spotlight in the last few months. And as people are kind of starting to fill in their responses on the poll, maybe we can get started with regards to understanding your framing and your context. Like when you're seeing this conversation evolve from the vantage point that you have at the Secretary General's office, what do you see? Like, how did this come about? Are countries taking industry transformation seriously?
Thank you, Sabojit, and thank you for hosting this webinar today. I'm very happy and delighted that I could participate. And so nice to see so many familiar faces and colleagues here. Yes, to answer your questions, this agenda has evolved tremendously throughout the last 5 years. And as Andrea also just put together, like we see very positive developments in the NDCs. And without industry, no credible net zero plan or 1.5 pathway is credible. So we need to have the industry on board. We also see still that even though we see progress in the NDCs put forward, we see that the world is still on a path to 2.3 degrees Celsius, which is way above and therefore we need to do more to bend the curve. And here is industry as well very key and central. We know we have the clean technologies available, so that is also what the Secretary General is pushing for, upscale of that. We also know that we now have to go from planning to delivery in the NDCs. Very happy to see the NDC movement and the whole UN system support to countries' development of these NDCs. Very happy. And now the UN Secretary General is also calling for UNDP to build on the climate promise architecture put forward to ensure that the entire UN system is also ready to support in the implementation piece. Because our goal is to ensure that every developing country that seeks our support have access to the support it needs to turn these NDCs into action. So that's the next steps from his side that he is rallying around. And as Andreea also put forward, there had been positive momentum during COP, the Lim Declaration, new industry acceleration hubs, and new commitments, and was high on the COP30 action agenda. I was also recently in Riyadh. I joined your Global Industry Summit, where my task was also to put renewable energy at the agenda, and also the climate piece. And especially the UN Secretary General has been a huge also advocate for the economic opportunity behind the energy transition, the last year. So emphasizing what a good economic case it is, putting renewable energy forward. And we saw, for example, last year that 92% of new power capacity generated came from renewables, 92%, which is a lot. We also saw that $2.2 trillion was invested in clean energy. This was double the amount of what was invested in fossil fuels. We saw that renewables is the cheapest new form of electricity, and we also see that it's generating more jobs than investments in fossil fuels. So these economic arguments for the energy transition is really important now to rally behind. And nevertheless, we are still standing at a point where it's also key to emphasize that is the transition happening fast enough? That is one key question that the Secretary General is standing behind. But then the other question is it fair enough? Is it just enough to help every developing country and to combat inequalities? So that is the narrative that we really want to emphasize also when talking on renewables and industrialization in general. I think also a last point that I want to emphasize is that this morning, very early New York time, but it was noon in Nairobi, Selvin Hart, the Secretary General's Climate Advisor, Assistant Secretary General, and UNEP and UNCTAD, they launched the new UN Task Force on Critical Energy Transition Minerals. And I will just advise everyone, if you didn't see it, to read the media briefing on it, because this new task force will take forward the important work that the UN Secretary General put forward last year when he had a panel that came out with 5 recommendations and also 7 principles. And this task force will unite the whole UN system and stakeholders to implement these key pillars to ensure that minerals will also benefit the countries that do have them. So I'll just stop here, I think, and I'm so excited to join and listen to all of your input. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thanks, Emma. I think very, very valid and important points. I think fast is one thing. Fairness is also kind of integral and important for this transformation. And I think you also touched upon an important piece, which in my framing I did not kind of get into as much, which is the intersectoral importance of the transformation. I mean, what we are seeing happen in the energy space with the clean energy transformation really needs to stem and foster and makes the case for the transformation also to take place in the other key sectors which lead to development. And I think, the industrial sector stands at a very important crossroad for that conversation. So thanks, Emma. I think, noting the time, we'll probably, come back to you once we also hear from some of the other colleagues. But I'll take this moment to turn to my colleague at UNIDO, Hugo, who was, just like Emma, also very closely engaged in the conversations for COP30. Whether it was for shaping the action agenda, which Emma, you mentioned and you referenced that, there was a lot of work under the broader action agenda items, whether it was the activation groups, which, Brazil put forward, whether there was, a new declaration. So, Hugo, if I just turn to you, from your reflections of actually being in Belém, what did you see and what did you feel with regards to this industry transformation dialogue and discussion? Thoughts from you, Hugo?
Thanks, Sargo. So no, I wasn't able to see the fire. Had left before, but in case for the industry bit, as most of the people that are lucky enough to be engaged in the COP process, we know that the work that happens at COP has, actually been done through the year. Maybe something to flag to our colleagues around this call is that you might also have noticed that at COP28, industry was clearly part of the discussions, whereas at COP29, it was a bit less prominently so. So building on that, maybe first diagnostic that industry, as Emma has just mentioned, cannot be absent from the international discussions if we are to meet the climate targets. And also noting that, over the years, we've seen that ODAs have come under stronger and stronger pressure. We kind of have these two main items that we needed to address, both to have industry feature in international discussions in an inclusive manner. So, putting multilateralism back at top of everybody's priorities, and also ensuring that, the little resources that we have the most impact. So this, to have in consideration, has driven the discussions with the COP presidency over the year. So you might also have seen the new structure of the discussions that had, these 6 thematic axes with 30 objectives and the granary of solutions. As you might remember, industry fitted into axis 1 and then group 2, where hard to abate sectors were. Something also to feature is that, although industry was fitting there, it also impacted a lot of the other thematics of COP. Maybe something that we can claim is that industry was maybe represented in almost 50% of the plans to accelerate solutions. Both in dimensions such as steel and cement, but also green demand, finance, skills, building sustainable buildings with sustainable materials. So just to know that green industry was permeating across all discussions at COP. Also noting that we at UNIDO, but also through the Climate Club and the Global Matchmaking Platform and the Breakthrough Agenda, have been building a platform so that discussions with emerging economies and developed countries can happen and reflect both priorities. This led to some the COP30 statement and the roadmap, and also finally to the Belém Declaration, which is trying to unite countries to ensure that the action agenda, building on the plans to accelerate solutions, get to the highest level and have the backing of a core group of countries engaged in industry. So summing up to your question, Sarabjit, it was really maybe in a sense enthusiasming to see discussions, so many discussions on what I can call boring topics, which are standards for green materials. These are very specific topics, and still so many discussions happening on that. So revealing that this is raising. So I mean, these discussions are coming up to higher levels. It's now embedded in the COP process, and through this Belém Declaration and the initiatives such as ITA, UNIDO's activities, of course, the GMP, we're going to make sure that industry stays at the highest level, that we have this inclusive approach where we're sure to reflect emerging economies perspectives, and that we develop this green industry with all the dimensions that we need to address, both technical, but also financial, and of course, human. I'll stop there. We are conscious of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Hugo. So I think, yeah, there are like lots of things which went down in Belém, clearly from what you're sharing on industry decarbonization. And of course, the Belém Declaration, more can be found out on the UNIDO and COP30 different pages. We will circulate these after the webinar with all participants. On the activation groups in particular, Hugo, if I may just kind of turn to briefly, because you mentioned the granary of solutions from the initial, review of the different activation groups. And then the granary of solutions, we see that the number of solutions as well, in the industrial space, probably is almost 40 to 50% of all the solutions which were listed. Were there any remarkable solutions that you would want to kind of also inform us about, from the ones that you saw and were aware of? Like, for instance, the Global Matchmaking Platform itself is a solution. What were some of the other solutions that you that piqued your interest?
Well, there were a few. One of course, is the one that I belong to, the Net Zero Partnership, being now kind of maybe the holder of the hub for green industry hubs, green industrialization hub accelerators. So trying to ensure that we have this recipe, or that what we hope is a successful recipe to ensure that we are channeling resources, technology, technical support, on a bilateral approach, country to country, but also kind of with a target approach. This is quite enthusiastic for the next month and weeks. Also, of course, there were on the topic that I work with. So I'm still a breakthrough facilitator. So we had some solutions on standards, covering. We're trying to achieve interoperable standards across, the different approaches, both in Asia, but also in Europe and America, where we're trying to address how do we classify green steel or near zero steel or low emission steel, same for cement. So there were some accomplishments made by Responsible Steel on that front. Also, maybe to flag one of the singles most important, maybe drivers of change, which can be a public procurement. We had Brazil join the IDDI, as well as Australia. Major announcements, to engage countries, countries that are, looked at as examples in this. Of course, we had the Climate Club pledge on that same topic. Those were kind of very good ones. The working group, international assistance, also had a plan to accelerate solution at COP. This initiative was both convened by the Breakthrough Agenda and the Global Matchmaking Platform. And the idea here is to identify the key gaps in international assistance, so as to develop a roadmap to address those gaps for green industrialization in emerging economies. And this also was figuring at COP through a plan to accelerate solutions. Very exciting, and everything, as I was saying, was paving the way for the Belém Declaration, which took this path and say, okay, we'll build on this on the global stock take, so that it doesn't get dropped in the near future. So really action driven. A lot to look in the coming days. As we shape this up.
Thanks, Hugo. Thanks for sharing your insights and thoughts from COP. And I think it's very difficult to capture all that went down there, and I think would be good to kind of start articulating this with inputs also from the wide stakeholder community that we have. And so I think today's discussion, therefore, for us is also very, very timely. And a key stakeholder to all of this was Dio from UNFCCC. We're really, privileged to have you today joining us, Dio, to share your insights and your thoughts from the vantage point that you enjoy at UNFCCC, given the fact that you are in charge of all the discussions taking place within the negotiation or the action agenda on mitigation. We, of course, the excitement on the action agenda front with so many different announcements and statements. We are very, very enthused and we are very positive. When we see this also on the negotiation side and for parties actually coming up with common agreed statement, it's perhaps not that exciting when it comes to kind of industrial actions. You may have a different viewpoint on that. So, Theo, what are your reflections from COP, particularly on this particular theme?
Yeah, thank you, Savajit, for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as the previous speakers focused more on the global climate action agenda side, let me focus more on the party negotiation side. Let me start by saying that COP30 was quite different from recent COPs. It happened against the backdrop of the significant geopolitical challenges. But despite these headwinds, country managed to reach a consensus on Belém political package. Yes, the key outcomes from the package certainly include decision related to global goal on adaptation finance, but they also include decision related to the launch of just transition mechanism, 2-year work program on the climate finance, and 3-year dialogue on the international cooperation related to trade, and then launch of tropical forest forever facilities. And all of these decisions and initiative will further push NDC towards actions, as Brazilian presidency called COP30 as implementation COP. I think Andreea mentioned this previously. Also, if we focus a bit more a bit away from the COP30 only, the Paris Agreement policy cycle is not shaped by the outcome of the COP30 alone. In the past, since the adoption of the Paris Agreement a decade ago, the previous COPs laid a critical foundation for the development and implementing NDC, including this mitigation in the industrial sectors. For example, at COP20, the first global stock decisions are included on the energy-related efforts, global effort that includes the initiatives on the industries like CCUS uptake and the low carbon hydrogen productions and sustainable fuel efforts. Then the finance side, that's important, that stretch across adaptation and mitigation, both sides. Last year, there was an important decision on the 1.3 trillion new collective global finance goal. And also we finalized the Article 6 rulebook that also support the further acceleration of industrial decarbonization. So all these outcomes had contributed to the development and implementation of the new NDCs that we have received. And then in the guiding question, there was the issue of the mitigation heavy NDCs. Then in the global multilateral decision at COP30, the countries acknowledge that NDCs are improving over time. They go beyond mitigation, incorporating other elements such as adaptation finance, technology, and capacity building, and Article 6, and just transition, etc. So if you look at the latest version of the NDC synthesis report, for example, 75%, 3/4 of parties included information on climate finance, and 73% included adaptation components, and 70% included just transition elements. This is important because as IPCC is clarified, this transformation, I think transformation was a key word in the previous speakers as well. This transformation we need for rapid and deep emission cuts, and a transformative adaptation is unprecedented in scale. So this transformation process must be inclusive, and no one should be left behind. And in this context, Indonesia evolving from mitigation-only approach towards broader sustainable development approaches for just, equitable, and orderly transitions. So COPs are enabling these evolutions by delivering the various decisions and initiatives that are necessary to support parties to develop and implement such NDCs. That's how I see the recent trend of the COPs and NDCs.
Thanks, Gio. Sorry, go ahead, please. Okay, so Gio, thank you. I think this is extremely insightful. I think a colleague also did mention as part of the Q&A that it would be, given the richness of the conversation and the number of points, it would also be worthwhile to capture much of these in some kind of bullet pointed outcomes, which we'll certainly be doing as a follow-up. Today's was more of a stock take in taking stock of what really went down, and there was a lot which was happening. So, Dio, what you also reference, I think we have seen from Paris to Belém, given the fact that we are at the 10th year, decade. I personally, have seen this transformation when I was in Paris with the nature of INDCs which were coming in at that time, and translating from the INDCs to the first NDC submissions the year after, and then thereafter for many countries the second, and now the third. I think it's been a continuous process. And what you also touched upon, there was this time a bit of a request to the countries as they were preparing their NDC 3.2 to look at it in a more economy-wide fashion and look at sectors beyond the core sectors that they have been kind of looking at till now. So I think points all very well taken. The fact that even in the global Mutirao, the fact that it was an economy-wide conversation, which also kind of stimulated much of this transformation or transition conversation to take place, even though the global headwinds were suggesting differently. I think it's something certainly to be positive about and feel that action is taking place. But there was a lot which went on to make much of this happen, and I know that many of our colleagues, and I'll turn now in this light to you, Lulu, from UNDP. I think the climate promise played a significant role in ratcheting up the expression of interest from the countries on delivering ambition. Which of course translated into these positive mitigation related focused NDCs as well. So Lulu, to you, some initial reflections from COP30, and then how did this happen? What happened behind the scenes to really ratchet up the level of ambition, or was it purely the countries taking the driver's seat to make it happen?
Thank you so much, Sarbajit, and it's really great to be part of this discussion, and I've really enjoyed listening to the interventions by some of the other panelists. I think from our perspective, indeed, we saw a very high level of coordinated UN system support. As Emma already mentioned, the Secretary General requested UNDP through the climate promise to mobilize or support the coordination of the technical coordination of the UN system to provide support to countries to prepare the new NDCs. And so we saw that there was an increasing quality of the NDC submissions based on, in many cases, this coordinated support from the UN system to support countries. I also think that there was an increasing recognition by countries to have a more kind of economy-wide whole of society approach to the process, and not just having the NDC be relegated to one ministry in charge, but really have that process kind of solicit a wider set of stakeholder consultation within government, with the private sector, and communities themselves. And so we are seeing increasing demand from countries now to really focus on implementation. And so at the request of the SG as well, we are looking to coordinate as a UN system to support the implementation of the NDCs, because I think, as already mentioned by many of my panelists, this is also what we saw from COP, a real focus on implementation. I also think what was interesting to see was what was really placed at the heart of the presidential consultations, where there was a real discussion around trade restrictive unilateral measures and an open debate and dialogue between countries, a strong consensus and commitment around multilateralism and accelerating implementation and finance. And I think this is really where there is a strong role, again, of the UN system to support countries in this regard. And I think also on the issue of trade, you're seeing a real conversation between countries on the emerging dynamics between trade and climate policy. And we saw this in many of the discussions around the European CBAM and the specific implications that we will see for developing countries. There was a lot of kind of genuine concern by countries around the impacts of CBAM, especially with countries that are exporting to the EU, and really real questions around the fairness of some of these impacts. And I think, again, also more positively, a very heightened interest and growing demand for, green industrialization in EU trading partner countries, in many developing countries as well. As I think Hugo also mentioned, just a real interest in how does this play out in terms of, in developing countries. And so I think from our perspective, we see a clear opportunity based on some of the discussions at COP. One is really supporting countries to navigate the increasingly complex, climate finance and climate trade dynamic. But then also how are we supporting countries to build institutional capacity, policy and technical capacity to make industrial decarbonization a reality? Because I think we're also seeing significant regional differences in terms of capacity. And so how can we have, targeted regional conversations that are able to address the context-specific realities of many countries? And I think also then the final piece is really around financing. How are we supporting countries to, increase access to finance, but then also the capacity to build out pipelines of projects that could also be supported by investors down the line. So these are some of my reflections and insights, and happy to contribute further. Thank you, Sarbjeet.
Thanks, Lulu. I think, certainly, I think both you and Dio, mentioned the importance of, climate finance, and it's not something that, we are just kind of seeing it from the numbers, but we are also seeing it, as very explicit requests coming from countries that, there is this commitment, there is this, desire to make this transformation and this change. But I think, a lot of it will be reliant on the nature of, climate finance that we are able to unlock, and also the technical assistance that can be complemented with the finance to allow for this capacity building to shape up and take place. I think what Hugo mentioned before, much of this we are trying to kind of have a coordinated approach to doing it through this working group. So for country representatives who would want to kind of engage on this discussion a little further, please feel free to kind of reach out to see how the working group on supporting EMDs for technical and financial assistance is shaping up to have much of this discussion. Thanks also, Lulu, for talking about the support which countries have been receiving in this space. And if I may request my colleagues who are managing to also put back the slides up, because I think it's now also timely to then have this conversation with the kind of support that countries may be able to kind of receive to make this transition possible. This was a COP where many of these commitments were made, many of these solutions were kind of put forward. But I think now we are moving from the commitments to actions, and I think countries would require a good amount of coordinated support to make this transformation and transition happen. It's not just for steel and cement, it's also for textiles, it's also for fertilizers, it's also for sectors which are heavy energy users, whether it's kind of automotive or others. I think we need to kind of look at all of these sectors, and all of these require very different kinds of technical know-how and skills. So we at the Global Matchmaking Platform have been coordinating with a large number of partner organizations. Can somebody kind of give me a heads up saying that whether you see the screens right now? Yes, so we have been, already kind of coordinating with a large number of partner organizations to do a bit of a landscaping with the kind of support that could be extended to countries. So we now have, whether it's from the financial institutions or whether it's, the technical institutions, many of whom were referenced during the discussion today. We are providing the plethora of these partner organizations to be able to support the countries in making the transformation when we receive these requests. And I'll turn now to my colleague Nurzat to give you a bit of specific example of how this support is being provided by UNIDO's Net Zero Partnership. So over to you, Nurzat. You are the program manager for the Net Zero Partnership. How can countries benefit from the support which these different organizations, and including yours, is providing to make the transition possible? Nurzat?
Thank you, Sarbajit. For those of you who don't know about Net Zero Partnership for Industrial Decarbonization, it is a global initiative aimed to support emerging markets and developing economies with decarbonizing heavy-emitting industrial sectors such as steel and cement. We provide technical support to countries, and we provide broad range of support to countries with advancing industrial decarbonization. As Sarbojit mentioned, we're also one of the delivery partners of the Global Matchmaking Platform, and we are happy to respond to country requests that are coming through the Global Matchmaking Platform. So what kind of requests we would be willing and happy to respond to countries? On the topic of NDC implementation, NDC 3.0, we will be happy to support countries with developing NDC implementation plans for the industrial sector, financing strategies for NDC implementation, and of course, strengthening the monitoring, reporting, and verification schemes of industrial sector GHG emissions. We're already providing the support to a number of countries, including Morocco, Kenya, Indonesia, and we'll be happy to expand or provide the support to more countries. Those countries that are only in the very beginning of their journey of pursuing industrial decarbonization and don't know where to start, we'll be happy to support them with capacity building to provide a bit better and deeper understanding of how you can pursue industrial decarbonization, what are the policy schemes available, and we'll be also happy to support countries with developing sectoral roadmaps, where we will be happy to identify what are the technology pathways, policy levers for decarbonizing heavy emission industrial sectors. Those of you that already have targets and have roadmaps in place and now in the process of developing policy schemes and thinking how to go about it, we'll be also happy to support with development of standards and policies and regulations for industrial decarbonization. And here I would like to highlight a specific support that we are now providing to countries is support with developing and adopting standards for green steel and cement, and support with rolling out green public procurement scheme for industrial products. And also another type of support that we, as well as other delivery partners of the GMP, will be able to support countries is support with identifying and developing a pipeline of industrial decarbonization projects for financing. Because of course, that's actually one of the challenges and gaps that we're currently observing, that there is a healthy pipeline of projects that are ready for the investment. And there we can do, again, broad range of support from planning to helping actually developing the investment ready proposal to actually identifying the financing schemes and financing partners for those projects. So these are the type of support that we're happy to extend to countries along with all the other delivery partners of the GMP. Thank you, and Sarbajit, over to you.
Thank you, Nurzad. I think, that's a very clear, example of, the nature of support which is available. And it's not just kind of UNIDO, as, Nurzad mentioned, there's a host of other organizations who are available to provide this support and assistance to translate the ambition that countries have outlined as part of their NDCs or other commitments into action. So, I think that's a very strong and clear message that this support exists. Please reach out to us if you would like to, learn more or have some of your key projects translated into ideas of projects translated into actions. We'll be happy to support. So today, I think we are already at the hour. This was the first discussion that we wanted to kind of have as a bit of a stock take from COP30 and the ambition which has been raised, translating that ambition gradually into action. We don't have much time to kind of start acting on it. And we will be again reconvening in a different constituency, in a different group again in 2026. So maybe if I may take a moment to also check with all the participants, what would be other topics of interest as we go into 2026 for us to kind of explore together. So if I may have that last question for all participants to answer up on the screen, please. What would be other topics or themes that you would like us to focus on for the next round of discussions that we have? I think Nurzad already mentioned that the support is available across the board, but we did hear about the importance of finance. Would you want us to focus on that? On global partnerships, we have mentioned many of the announcements were around partnership and strengthening, or on technologies and issues of policies, whether it's public procurement or other thematic issues such as standards. Thank you for providing your inputs. And with that, I think 3 minutes over, I would draw this session to a close. But before doing that, a big thank you to all the panelists who joined us, spared their valuable time, but more importantly, their insights from what has been an absolutely super busy and intense last few months building up to COP in raising and ratcheting up the level of ambition on industrial transformation and transition. This is, of course, the first of many discussions that we will be having, but more important, translating these discussions, commitments, and dialogues into action. And for that, whether it's the UN organizations or other partner organizations who are working in this space, we are happy to kind of provide this space, this platform for convening dialogue and discussions and hearing from the large number of stakeholders from across the world. So thank you once again for joining this first webinar of this new series of webinars from the Global Matchmaking Platform, and look forward to connecting on the other side of the new year. Wishing all of you a happy season's greeting. Hope you are able to take some time off at the end of the year. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us.